Hello everyone, Theodore Shoebat here, giving you guys another message that you will not hear at church. I guarantee that. Today I want to talk to you guys about how social media has actually made people stupider. And it is a really interesting thing to observe. It's a sociological observation that is quite interesting. And I'll just give you my suspicion as to why and how social media makes people dumber. So back in the old days, when people relied on newspapers, they relied on television, they relied on radio for their information and for their news and for information on current events, journalists would have to do research before reporting on something. So they didn't have the internet to get information. They did not have the internet as a source from which to gain information on the news, on current situations, wars, conflicts, whatever. And so they had to go and investigate things. They had to interview people. They had to go to libraries. They had to go out of their way to gain information. So therefore, they had to work harder to gain information. And when people have to work harder to gain information, then the information is more original. The articles that they would write would be more original. They would be more in depth. And they would just be more accurate, right? They would have a much better level of depth of veracity. So in those days, I mean, if you watch television interviews from, let's say, the 1960s, 70s, 80s, and even in the early 90s, and before all of these decades, people just spoke in a much more articulate fashion than they do today. People today are yeah, and they got all these filler words because today people just don't have the vocabulary to describe situations better. And so the internet comes along. Now, people, I hope you guys don't think I'm just trashing the whole internet. I'm not. The internet is an amazing tool if you use it in a healthy way. But when the internet first comes along, this dumbing down of society through the internet, or people getting stupider on account of the internet, it doesn't happen immediately, right? So you have AOL and all these internet outlets and all of these internet companies that people started signing into, right? So when we first started out with the internet, we started out with AOL. And even then, you had the big established media outlets like the New York Times, Time Magazine. They started making their own websites, and they were essentially doing the same thing on the internet that they were doing on paper. The only difference is that it was digital, but still they were doing their investigative work and all of that. So internet was a great source of information. It still is, but things changed dramatically with social media. It's not the internet that I'm really specifying here. I'm actually specifying social media. The whole target of my discourse here is social media. So how did social media make people dumber? Well, with social media came a much faster way to distribute information, to distribute stories. So when something happens, let's say a terrorist attack happens, or let's say some big shooting happens, like what happened in Las Vegas last night, everyone's reporting it, and you have this flood of reporting on the internet. So and essentially what happens is that the market is being flooded with information, and now everyone is a reporter, everyone is a journalist, everyone is distributing information. Everyone's got a blog, a YouTube channel, Facebook page, Twitter page, all that stuff. So nowadays, it's not so much how much research you do, as it is how fast you put out the information, because now information is being spread within milliseconds. You put an article on Facebook, within milliseconds, people are getting it on their feeds. They're getting it on their pages on Facebook. They're getting it on their Twitter accounts. So in milliseconds, information is being distributed. So now you're in competition with other people as to how fast you are going to put out your information. So instead of sitting down and saying, okay, what happened, and you're going through the who, the what, the where, and the why, and the how, and all that, instead of going through that process, that investigative process, and looking up names, looking up multiple different websites, looking up different books on a particular subject to give a better background, to give a better and a more in-depth background on a certain situation. Now you're just like, okay, let's find out what happened. Bam, 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 put the report out. And people aren't even so much focused on accuracy or in-depth investigative work. Now it's just, we have to get the information out there, because if we don't, all these other websites are going to beat us to it. And so you have all these people just putting information out, and it's not necessarily accurate because they have rushed through it. So a good example of this is what happened yesterday, right? You had the shooting, and it's the biggest mass shooting in American history. This Stephen Paddock guy is the biggest mass murderer in U.S. history. And now you have all these different blogs and different websites that they market to a particular audience. So for one example, you have the counter-jihad. And the counter-jihad movement caters to a certain audience. People who just want to hear about Islam all day and how bad Muslim people are. And so when the shooting happens, the first thing that the counter-jihad audience wants is it a Muslim? That's all they want to know. They don't even give a shit about about where it happened, or they don't give a shit about what kind of gun he used or whatever. They just want to know, is it a Muslim? They actually care more about that than anything else. That is actually more of a priority to them than how many people were killed. So it's like, was he a Muslim? Was he a Muslim? Was he a Muslim? It doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter if he was anything else. What matters is he a Muslim? And they never sit there and think, okay, people were killed. This guy just slaughtered a whole bunch of people. Whatever his religion was, one thing that we can conclude automatically is that his religion was evil, be it Islam, Satanism, whatever, Darwinism, whatever. And so the counter-jihad websites like Jihad Watch or Pamela Geller, they just want to find out if the guy's a Muslim. And if they can't find any definitive proof, they're going to go on circumstantial evidence, or they're going to go on tidbits of information that are not even evidence. They don't even prove that the guy is a Muslim. So they all went out of their way to somehow imply or suggest that he is a Muslim. They can't say emphatically that he is because they don't have any definitive proof, or they don't have any substantial proof. But what they do find is some story from a website that says ISIS claims that the guy was a Muslim. ISIS claims that the killer, Stephen Paddock, converted to Islam 3 months ago, and he changed his name to Abdullah Abdi Abd al-Rahim al-Almadi or some bullshit like that. And that's it. They're going to go with that story. And all of a sudden, ISIS becomes a source. And if ISIS said that he was a Muslim, right? And then you had witnesses come out and say, well, we heard Allahu Akbar. Or the SWAT guys came out and they said, man, we found all sorts of Islamic paraphernalia in his luggage. They found a Quran, something. I would say, okay, fine, go with it. He was a Muslim. Okay, no problem there. But to sit there and try to force the story to being one about Islam is utterly unethical, in my opinion, because in that situation, in that case, it's obvious that your motive isn't fighting evil. Your motive is just to push a narrative. It's all the Muslims. And so it's not about helping the society, because society has so many different ills that we need to fix, so many different ills that we need to get rid of, shit that we need to clean out. They don't care about that. Homosexuality, Satanism, atheism, Darwinism. Oh, they don't give a shit about that. It's all about, oh, the Muslim thing, because that's the story. It's going to get them numbers, it's going to get them funding, whatever. And so when I look at the story, I say, okay, I'm not going to report on it right away. I'm going to take my time, I'm going to read some articles, and you find out different things. You find out, okay, he was addicted to gambling, he was an alcoholic, he was spending $10,000 to $30,000 a day on gambling, and you're like, okay, no evidence for Islam, but we do know that this guy was a loser, and he was trash, and these counter-jihad guys don't want to look at the elephant in the room, and that is, we got a crazy white guy here, who everyone thought was a nice guy, and he was a gambling addict. And gambling is a very destructive thing to do. And so when you have that sort of self-destructive behavior, it's going to lead to more destructive behavior. And again, the guy's father was on the FBI most wanted list. He was an inveterate bank robber. He stole tens of thousands of dollars robbing banks. That's also a factor. So we have a criminal mentality. We have a history of criminality. We have dysfunctionality. Thus, we have a reflection of the decayed society that is in America. Counter Jihad doesn't want to talk about that. They just want to talk about Muslims, illegal immigrants, blah, 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 because that is the narrative they want to push. And behind that narrative, truly, behind that narrative is this American obsession with being invaded. There was actually a guy who worked, I believe he worked in Washington, I forgot his name, but years ago, before 9/11, before the 9/11 attack, a number of months before 9/11, he said that Americans love to fantasize about being invaded. And so people capitalize on this paranoia because it gets them views. People don't want to hear about how dysfunctional their neighborhood is. People don't want to hear about how dysfunctional their own families are. Half the freaking viewers who look at counter-jihad material probably look like the guy who shot up this country in Western concert. And nobody wants to talk about that. Nobody wants to talk about the elephant in the room. I got into an argument with somebody this morning, and it was not really an argument, it was more like a friendly debate. And I said, listen, yeah, we have a Muslim problem, but a lot of this Islamic problem was created by powerful governments like the United States government. A lot of it was created by secret service agencies like CIA, MI5, and a lot of different secret service agencies in Western Europe. A lot of it was created by NATO. So a lot of these Islamic terrorists, they're really a problem invented by big major powers. And if you look at the major powers, they're the United States, and they're in Western Europe, and they're in East Asia, in particular Japan. So let's focus on these major powers and see what conspiracies they're doing. Oh, no, we don't want to do that. We just want to talk about the illegal immigrants and the Muslim terrorists. Why? Because it's easier to talk about these things, and they get more of a reaction, as opposed to talking about the elephant in the room, which is the big white countries who have been responsible for slaughtering tens of millions of people. For example, when you have African countries fight each other, in a matter of years, you'll have 5 million people dead. When you have Middle Eastern countries fight against each other, or when you have civil war in Middle Eastern countries, as in the case with Syria, you'll have hundreds of thousands of people dead. But when you have Western European countries fight each other, or Western countries fight each other, as was the case in World War I and World War II, 50 million people dead, 30 million people dead, mass murders, up the freaking kazoo. And when people talk about world wars, they say, oh, the future of warfare is going to be fourth generation warfare, right? Again, nobody wants to talk about the elephant in the room, which is the white people countries, the Western European countries, the big powerhouses, the big major banks. Nobody wants to talk about that, because then that would mean you would have to criticize your own people, and people have difficulty doing that. So they just want to talk about the other guys, right? The militias, the dudes who are walking around with AK-47s and they got Nike shoes on, and they're like drinking soda pop, and they're drinking Pepsi. They're always drinking Pepsi, by the falafel stand. And so I remember hearing this one guy. He works with PJ Media, which is another neocon bullshit right-wing website. And he was saying, oh, the future of warfare is going to be fourth generation warfare. The future of war is not going to be like what we saw in World War I and World War II. It's going to be fourth generation warfare. And this type of talk sells. The reason why it sells is because nobody wants to think that a major world war, like what we saw in the first half of the 20th century, is going to happen again, because that would mean hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people dying. Millions and tens of millions, in fact, dying. From war, starvation, disease, from just soldiers killing each other, from soldiers killing civilians, from civilians being killed by incoming fire and all that. Nobody wants to think about that. It's much more comforting to believe that for the rest of your existence, war is simply going to be these Chris Kyle types with keffiyehs around their necks, fighting a bunch of malnourished third world people who live in villages and hang out by the falafel stand, who can't even shoot a gun to save their own lives. That's much more comforting because, oh, we don't have to worry about that. We can just, enjoy ourselves here in America, eat Burger King, drink my Starbucks, and, Chris Kyle over there, he's going to just take those dudes out because those guys can't fight for shit. And it's much more comforting to believe that, as opposed to, hey, listen, the big power countries, yeah, they're going to be coming. And there was a short duration of time between World War I and World War II, like 15, 20, 25 years, depending on which era of the war you're reading about, because World War II began earlier for the East Asians than it did for the Americans. But anyway, regardless of which part of the war you look at, there was a short duration of time, a relatively short amount of time between World War I and World War II. Why was that? Because they didn't have nuclear bombs. The reason why there has been so much time that has passed since the last World War, over 75 years, is because of the nuclear bomb. And the nuclear bomb has been the biggest deterrent preventing a world war, because nobody wants to get nuked. And so what is taking place right now in the major powers is the development of nuclear weapons. If a major power, a major economic power, does not have a nuclear weapon, it will develop a nuclear weapon. So right now, Turkey is in the process of developing nuclear weapons because they don't have any nukes. Hell, they don't even have any nuclear reactors. Japan is in the process of developing nuclear weapons. They have the utmost of capabilities to develop nuclear weapons. They can develop nuclear weapons within 6 months. They have enough plutonium to create 5,000 nuclear bombs. So those guys are going to have a nuke in the near future. Iran wants to build nuclear weapons. Turkey, as I already mentioned, Turkey, they're in the process of developing nuclear weapons. Germany wants to have nuclear weapons. They don't have nuclear weapons, but they sure as hell have the industrial capacity to do so. And they are one of the largest developers and manufacturers of firearms in the world. So if you don't believe that they have the capacity to become a military power again, well, then you need to start reading up more, because they do. In fact, already they have a pretty substantial military force. But we're not talking about substantial military forces. We're talking about economic powers that already have substantial military forces, but they don't have nuclear weapons. But they have the capacity to do so. And so they are all developing nuclear bombs. Why? Because they know that, for one, they want to start another world war, but they also understand that in order to partake in a world war, they're going to need to have nuclear bombs, because if they don't, then they're just going to get nuked by America. And England right now, England is in the process of creating the biggest warships in its history, in the history of the United Kingdom. Why are they developing these gigantic warships? Well, they say it's to create jobs. Well, that's bullshit. I mean, if you just want to make jobs to stimulate the economy, then you would build roads, you would build bridges, you would build streetlights or something like that. You wouldn't build these gigantic warships. You wouldn't be building the biggest warships in your history. The reason why you're building such colossal warships is because you know that a major war is on the way. And Great Britain left the European Union. They know that that has pissed off the Germans, and they know that a great conflict is on the way, just as a great conflict was on the way before World War I, and before World War I, the British were developing warships. And before World War I, there was a major arms race. So what you are witnessing right now is the early stages of a major arms race between the major powers. But again, nobody wants to talk about this. They just want to talk about Mr. Ahmed in Somalia, who, yeah, is a Muslim, yes, is a fanatic, but can't shoot for shit. And if he ever fought against a formidable military, doesn't even have to be an American military, it could be the French military, it could be the English military, he would get slaughtered. But of course, everybody wants to think that those are the guys that we're going to fight because it's a hell of a lot easier. But you see, this is not a change from the initial subject. I know I started out talking about why social media makes people dumber, but what I'm talking about now is actually interconnected with this very subject, because you have all these crazy ass articles, and I'm seeing more and more of this of, Somalians are going to invade America. Oh, these people are going to invade America. Mexicans are going to invade America. And you see so much of this shit. Sharia law is in this small town somewhere in Alabama, and it's bullshit. Sharia law is not going to take over America. That is impossible. It's not going to happen. How do I know this? Because Muslim people cannot even rule their own damn countries. Look at Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is on the brink of major economic destabilization. They have difficulty controlling, the Arabs have difficulty controlling Bahrain. They have difficulty fighting the Yemenites, the Houthis. Look at Syria. Look at Bashar al-Assad. Without the help of Russia, he could not even control his own damn country. Saddam Hussein had a huge army. It was like 2 million people. And Saddam was a joke. Oh yeah, Saddam has this huge army, 2 million man army. Well, look how long that lasted, right? 2 weeks, Saddam's army is destroyed. I actually talked to a former army guy. He specifically was a tanker, a guy who worked in tanks in the U.S. Army in the 90s. And I asked him, why was it so easy to destroy Saddam Hussein's tanks? What made the Iraqi tank inferior to the American tank? And he said, well, it's very simple. Saddam purchased Soviet tanks. And the Soviet tanks were actually decent tanks. The thing is that the Soviets had two different types of tanks. One that they kept for themselves, and the other that they sold to other countries, any country that was willing to buy them. The tank that they sold to other countries, the tanks that they exported, had armor that was like that thick. Nothing. And the American tank, he explained this to me. He says the American tank has the ability to destroy a target 3,000 feet away. So from 3,000 feet away, these American tanks were just picking out these Iraqi tanks. These Iraqi tanks that had extremely weak armor. And he told me it was literally like shooting fish in a barrel. So these are your Muslim countries. They can't even control their own countries. They can't even defend themselves from their own people, let alone an invading force like America. But yet again, you have all this misinformation. And it's a Muslim. It has to be a Muslim. And I'm like, no, the guy wasn't a Muslim. If he was a Muslim, we don't have evidence to conclude that yet. And if some evidence comes in the distant future that substantiates that he was a Muslim, then I will say, okay, he is a Muslim. I will gladly change my position. But until then, I'm telling you, there is no evidence to prove that this Stephen Paddock guy was a Muslim. But you have all these freaks on the internet who are like, he has to be a Muslim. No, he's got to be a Muslim. Why? Why does he have to be a Muslim? Are you telling me that a white guy can't slaughter people? And you have all these right-wing Jews who are like, oh, he had to be a Muslim. He had to be a Muslim. He had to have been, because a white guy would have never done this. Really? A white guy would have never done this. A good American patriot who salutes the flag and says the Pledge of Allegiance with tears running down his eyes. He would have never done this. Really? So you're telling me that a white man is not capable of committing mass destruction, which is a very racist statement. You're saying only the brown folks can do this, only the illegals can do this, only the Muslims can do this, right? And it's like these idiots don't even pay attention to history. They ignore history. In order to have the counter-jihad position, you have to ignore history. You have to ignore the fact that the European countries butchered tens of millions of people in the First World War and Second World War. And even if you look at the Jews, all these right-wing Jews are like, Muslim, Muslim, Muslim. I'm like, wait a second. When you guys were living under the white countries, like Germany, the Germans butchered you people. The Germans butchered more Jews than anybody else. And if you look at Islamic empires like the Ottoman Empire, well, there was anti-Semitism, of course, but there were certain occasions in which the Jews and the Ottomans worked together. For example, when the Ottomans invaded Malta. Before they went to Malta, who went with them? Jewish merchants who wanted to buy Christian slaves, because the Ottomans were like, yeah, well, these Knights of St. John and Malta, yeah, they're real pushovers. We'll take them out in a few days and you'll be able to buy your Christian slaves. Oh, really? Oh, I'm so glad, Mr. Ahmed Bey. I'm going to go over there and buy myself some Christian girls to sell for sex slavery. But it didn't happen that way. It took like 3 months, and they still didn't manage to invade the island. But because you have these huge audiences that want a specific headline, because back in the day it was like newspaper, radio, television, and it was like there was the journalist, and he gave you the information that he obtained through his own investigation, and he had to investigate because there was no internet. Go to the library. But even when the internet first came initially, you had these big established newspapers that dominated the internet as far as information went, and they still had to do investigative work. That's why you'll find all these really interesting articles on the New York Times from the 1980s about how the CIA worked with, a big Arab building industry to build tunnels under the ground in Afghanistan for the Taliban, and that actually explains those ISIS tunnels that Trump bombed. They were really just tunnels that the CIA built back in the 80s. But anyway, when social media came along, it changed everything. And now you had all these idiots. And it's not as though people weren't dumb before. What I'm saying is that when social media came, it enabled all the idiots to spread information. It enabled all the dumbasses to spread and distribute their dumbass shit within milliseconds. And because the general population is a mob, well, the mob wants to hear the stuff that excites them, right? The chatter, not the real investigative work. And so they want to hear, oh, it's the Muslims, oh, we're being invaded. They don't want to hear about how their neighbor Larry slaughtered 58, 59 people. And here's an interesting observation, and I'll make this last observation before closing. That's the most difficult thing about doing these videos. Is I want to say so many things, and at the same time, I don't want to make the video too long. Pamela Geller, right? She wanted so desperately for Stephen Paddock to be a Muslim. Same thing with Robert Spencer and the rest of these guys. They want so desperately for this guy to be a Muslim because that means headlines, that means views, that means, well, high viewership means, good funding, good popularity, and all that stuff. And when it turned out that it was obvious that this guy wasn't a Muslim, well, they kind of stopped talking about it, and they kind of just brushed it away. I mean, I went on Pamela Geller's website this morning. No talk about Stephen Paddock. She was clinging on to this one report about how ISIS said Stephen Paddock was a Muslim. That has yet to be proved. And it's really interesting listening to Pamela Geller go off about how, oh, these poor people listening to a country and western song. It was a country and western concert. Have you ever been around people who listen to country music? The nicest people in the world. And then when it turns out that the guy who killed all these people was a white dude, oh, fuck, to hell with these people. Who cares? So when a Muslim guy killed a bunch of fags, then it was like, oh, these poor faggots, oh, poor LGBT people, oh, blah, blah. All of a sudden, the perverts became a priority, right? And there's Donald Trump, I'm going to protect all these faggots and all these queers, I'm going to protect all of them, blah, blah, blah. But when it turned out that a white man killed 59 people and injured hundreds more, all of a sudden, the fags are more important than some good, redneck, red-blooded Americans listening to a country and western song. Let that sink in for a second. Let that sink into your brain for a moment. Because before it was, and I can guarantee you if Stephen Paddock was a Muslim, or if it was some guy named Ahmed or some Somalian immigrant who did it, I can guarantee you they would be pushing on that country and western shit for weeks, for months, probably for years. Oh, our good, because we know the general audience for country music are what? Republicans, conservatives, right-wingers, and all that. So it'll be like the good Christian white folks who listen to country and western music. They are the target. They are the target of this jihad terror. They want to destroy all of the good white folks. And then the liberals would come over and be like, relax, Islam is a religion of peace, blah, blah, blah. And then these people would be like, these liberals hate white people. They hate good white Christian people. They hate the white people. And these good, regular American folk who just want to listen to Toby Keith all day, they are the targets because they are America. They are the real America. But when it turns out that these good country folk were slaughtered by a fellow white dude, by a fellow cracker, then those people ain't shit. And the faggots in Orlando are more important than the good Americans who are listening to country music. And the faggots, these perverts, these sickos, they all of a sudden are a priority over the good American. So in other words, these secular guys who run the whole counter-jihad industry, they know which buttons to press. And if a Muslim kills some rednecks, oh, the good redneck people, and they know how to manipulate. They know that whole emotional framework by which to just grab and stir your emotions around. You know, the good American people with the flag and the red, white, and blue, and the country and western singer with the cowboy hat and the tank top, and he's got two flares in his hands, and he's on the freaking on the airstrip in the Air Force base, and he's waving the flares around, and the fighter jets are flying above him, and they're bombing Iraq, and they're killing little dancing Iraqis, and screw those Iraqis, they're not as important as American lives, blah, 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 and they know how to just manipulate that shit to no end. But when the good redneck folks are not killed by a Muslim, they're killed by their fellow white guy. Nobody wants to talk about the elephant in the room, and the perverts take a priority over the rednecks. They take a priority over the general population of America, which goes to show you that the counter-jihad folks don't give a shit about the average American. They don't even give a shit about fighting Islam. They give a shit about a narrative, because they know that by a narrative, they can get you to focus on it and ignore the other problems in society, and then allow those other problems to grow, thereby helping the faggot agenda, thereby helping the atheist agenda, thereby helping all these other evil agendas, and further fragment society, further ideologically fragment society. And when you don't have a good Christian basis of society, then that actually has an opposite effect of what these other guys claim that they want, which is to destroy Islam, and it'll actually only empower Islam. Just look at the situation in Spain, which I'm actually working on an article on it right now. Again, I'm not going to just boom, publish something on Catalonia, because I want to first investigate it, see what's going on, who are the players and all that, because it is a very interesting situation. Catalonia wants to secede from Spain. The Spanish government is saying, hell no, we're not going to allow you to divide our country, and they're right. They should not allow Catalonia to secede, because we cannot have division. A country cannot afford to have such division. And it's a very interesting situation, because you have the right-wingers and the left-wingers kind of joining forces in support of secession. And what you have in Spain so far, this is what I am observing, is you got these right-wing Nazi types, and then you got these Marxist types, and they're all kind of working together for a Catalonian secession. And ultimately, they want to divide Spain. And a lot of these right-wingers who want Catalonia to secede are actually using the Islamic migrant situation to justify their agenda. They're saying, well, the Spanish government is flooding Catalonia with all these Muslims, that's why we need to secede. Well, what will happen if Catalonia secedes from Spain? What will happen is you have a further fragmented Europe. And in the case of Spain, you have actually a further weakened Spain. And so if you divide Spain, well, guess what? That area is a lot easier to conquer. And then you have a country like Turkey. Interestingly enough, the Turkish government supports the secession of Catalonia. Why? Because Turkey understands that if you have a divided Spain, then you have a Spain that is easier to conquer. Look at Spain when it was conquered in the 8th century. It was divided. It was not like a unified Spain. Spain was not unified until the late 15th century. And so you have a very interesting situation here. And you have these Marxist types who are like, yeah, regionalism, yeah, we have to support the sovereignty of the community. And then you got the right-wingers who are like, yeah, we have to maintain the ecological foundation of the area, of the community. We have to maintain the environment. We got to help the environment. We got to support regionalism. We got to get these immigrants out because they're destroying the environment. They're destroying the homogenous ethnic community of Catalonia, and we have to get rid of them. We have to secede. And they're really very, very similar. So, very interesting situation. I will be writing on this subject, and will be giving you my thoughts on that. I'll be giving you a much more in-depth explanation in the incoming article, because I am going to be investigating this thoroughly and try to make some sense out of what's happening and what is the agenda behind it. But anyway, yes. So to further conclude, the ability for dumbasses to distribute information within milliseconds has further dumbed down the society, and that is my point in a summary. Now, I'm not saying that social media is bad. Social media is a great tool if you are giving good information. But social media is very dangerous if people are distributing shitty information. And the problem is that most people are stupid, and so they want stupid information, and that's what makes it damaging. So anyway, hope you guys learned something from this video. Hope you guys have enjoyed it. You just heard some theology. God bless, and God be with.